In a universe torn apart by endless war, where whole species vanish without leaving even a whisper behind, one human soldier thought he was the last beating heart on a dead world. But then he found her the last female of an alien race believed to be gone forever, and their meeting would spark a shocking survival story that no one could have predicted. The battlefield had fallen silent days ago, yet the silence was not peace. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and made breathing heavy. Burnt metal twisted into dark shapes across the horizon. Ships that once carried thousands now lay in ruins like broken bones. The ground was black and cracked, and the air carried the bitter smell of smoke and death. He moved carefully through it all, every step slow, his boots crunching on shattered glass and ash. His name was Daniel, and he was tired. He had seen war swallow worlds, but this place felt worse. It felt empty, abandoned by both gods and men. Daniel had no reason to expect life here. His unit was gone, his friends buried under rubble or burned away by plasma fire. He had been left with nothing but a rifle, a few rations, and the instinct to survive. For 3 days, he wandered the wasteland, searching for water, shelter, maybe even a signal that could lead him home. But deep inside, he knew home was gone. The war had stolen it. On the 4th day, while searching through the ruins of a collapsed building, he heard something strange. It was not the whistle of the wind or the echo of falling stone. It was softer, weaker, like a breath caught in the throat. His hand tightened on his rifle as he moved closer. Dust fell from the ceiling as he pushed broken metal aside, his heart beating faster with each sound. Then he saw her. She was lying in the shadows, curled up as if the weight of the world had crushed her spirit. Her skin was pale with a faint glow, her hair long and tangled, her eyes half closed in pain. She looked nothing like a human, yet her suffering was painfully familiar. She was thin, trembling, her body covered in bruises and cuts. For a long moment, Daniel thought she was a ghost, a trick of his broken mind. But then she blinked, and a weak sound escaped her lips. Daniel froze. He had heard stories of her kind beings once proud and strong, now hunted until nothing remained. The war had destroyed them, wiping away every trace of their civilization. The last he had heard, they were extinct. Yet here she was, alive but fading, a fragile echo of a people erased by war. She tried to push herself up when she saw him, but her arms gave way, and she fell back with a soft cry. Her eyes, a deep shade of silver, locked on him with fear and suspicion. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly, showing her his empty hands. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered, though he was not sure she understood his words. "I thought I was the only one left." Her lips moved, forming sounds in a language he did not know, broken and rough from thirst. Still, the meaning was clear enough. She did not trust him. Why should she? Humans had been part of the war machine that had destroyed her people. Daniel took off his pack and pulled out a small container of water. He held it where she could see, then placed it on the floor and pushed it toward her. For a moment she stared at him, her body tense. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached for it. She drank carefully, like every drop mattered, and in truth, it did. As she drank, Daniel watched her with a strange ache in his chest. She was the last female of her kind, maybe the last living soul besides himself on this ruined world. Something inside him shifted at that thought. He had no mission anymore, no orders, no cause to fight for. But looking at her, he felt something stir. Purpose. Night fell heavy and cold over the wasteland, and Daniel knew staying exposed was suicide. He carried her out of the broken building and found a small shelter in the ruins of an old bunker. Inside, the air was dry, and the walls gave protection against the chill wind. He laid her down gently, covering her with his torn jacket. She was weak, but her breathing steadied a little. Hours passed in silence. Daniel kept watch by the door, listening to the distant hum of machines in the sky. Patrol drones. Enemy scouts. They were still hunting survivors, and if they found her, they would finish what they started. He could not let that happen. Not to her. When he looked back at her, he saw her eyes open again. She studied him, not with trust yet, but with curiosity. In her gaze was the memory of a world long gone, a world he would never understand. He realized then that her survival meant more than his own. She was living proof that her people had existed, that they had not been completely erased. "Sleep," he whispered. "I'll keep watch." She closed her eyes again, though whether she understood his words he could not tell. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle and listened to the wind howl outside the bunker. He knew what he had to do. If she was the last of her kind, then protecting her was no longer just a choice, it was a duty. He was a soldier without a cause, and she was a cause without a protector. Together, they might still carve out life from the ashes, but danger was never far. As dawn painted the sky with a faint red glow, Daniel heard movement outside. The crunch of heavy boots, the low murmur of mechanical voices. Enemy patrol. They were sweeping the ruins, searching for survivors, searching for her. His chest tightened. He glanced back at the sleeping figure under his jacket. She was too weak to run, too fragile to fight. Daniel took a deep breath. He had to make a choice. Leave her and save himself, or stand and fight for the last fragile spark of a dying race. The decision burned in his mind, but deep down he already knew the answer. He had lost everything else, he would not lose this. He raised his rifle and steadied himself as shadows moved outside the bunker door. The hunt was closing in, and Daniel, the forgotten soldier, prepared to fight not for war, not for victory, but for the survival of one fragile life that still mattered. When the last female of her species opened her eyes to see a human soldier standing guard over her, she did not know if he was her enemy or her savior. Yet in the ruins of a dying world, hunted by patrols and shadows of war, survival would force them to trust each other, and that fragile trust would begin to change everything. The bunker walls shook as footsteps echoed above. Daniel pressed his ears back against the cold stone, rifle ready, his ears sharp. The patrol was close. He could hear the metallic growl of their machines and the heavy breathing of armored soldiers. The last time he had faced them, his entire squad had been wiped out. Now it was only him and the fragile life resting under his jacket. The thought made his grip tighten. He could not fail her. Not here. Not now. The door handle rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Daniel held his breath. For a moment he thought the door would burst open and light would flood in, but then a voice barked an order in the harsh tongue of their enemies. The footsteps faded, the sound of boots moved away, and the patrol passed by without checking inside. Daniel let out a long, slow breath, his heart still racing. They had been one breath away from death. He looked back at her. She was awake, her eyes silver and bright, even in the dim light. She had watched him stand guard with his weapon ready. Though she could not speak his language, her gaze held a question. Why had he stayed? Why had he risked his life for her? Daniel knelt beside her and offered a piece of dried ration, breaking it in half so it looked less threatening. She hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. For the first time Daniel spoke his name. "Daniel," he said, pointing at himself. She tilted her head, her lips forming the sound clumsily. Neil. It was soft, broken, but it made something inside him warm. Then she touched her chest weakly and spoke her own name. It was simple, short, a word that carried sorrow yet also strength. He repeated it back to her, and she nodded. In that small exchange, something shifted between them. They were no longer strangers in the ruins. Days passed in that bunker. "Daniel." searched the nearby ruins during daylight, scavenging scraps of food, broken wires he could turn into traps, and water collected from dripping pipes. Each time he left, she would watch him with quiet fear, as if she thought he might never return. But each time he came back, her relief was clear in her trembling breath, and the way her eyes softened. She grew stronger little by little, her wounds healing, her voice steadier when she tried to speak. She told him fragments of her story in gestures, drawings scratched into the dust, and broken words that slowly became clearer. Her people had been proud and strong once, protectors of ancient knowledge and healers of life. But they had been marked for destruction, their worlds burned, their families hunted. She had watched her sisters fall, her home burn, her skies darken. With warships. Now she was the last female of her kind, the last chance for her people to live again. Every word carried pain, but also fire. She had survived against impossible odds, and now she had someone standing beside her. Daniel listened to her stories with heavy silence. He had fought for years, told that victory meant glory, but seeing her truth made the war feel different. It was not glory, it was erasure. Entire worlds turned into dust. He began to understand why protecting her mattered. She was more than just one life, she was the final echo of a people who had been almost erased from the stars. But survival was never easy. At night they could hear machines crawling through the ruins, scanning, searching. Once, a drone hovered near the bunker opening, its red light sweeping through the darkness. Daniel crushed it with a rock before it could send a signal, his hands shaking with the effort. Another time, a band of human deserters passed nearby. They laughed and cursed, speaking of hunting the last prize to sell for a fortune. Daniel's blood turned cold when he realized who they meant. They were looking for her. He sat close to her that night, his voice low. "They want you," he said, though he knew she could only understand pieces. She touched his hand lightly, her eyes telling him she already knew. Fear lived inside her, but she was not broken. She had lost everything and still breathed. Daniel wondered if he could be as strong as she was. The bond between them deepened with every shared meal, every word learned, every long night spent listening for danger. She began to trust his touch, to let him clean her wounds, to lean against him when she was too weak to walk. And he found that her presence gave him something he had lost long ago, hope. She smiled once, just for a second, when he made a clumsy joke with his broken drawing in the dust. It was the first smile he had seen in months, and it filled the bunker with a warmth that no fire could give. Still, danger pressed closer. One morning, as Daniel returned from a scavenging run, he saw signs of enemy tracks near their hideout. They were circling in, searching more carefully now. He hurried back and told her with gestures and urgency. She understood, her silver eyes widening. They had to move. Staying in the bunker was death. Together they slipped into the ruins, Daniel leading with his rifle ready, her steps unsteady but determined. Every shadow felt alive, every echo dangerous. He guided her through broken walls and collapsed towers, keeping low, keeping silent. They reached the hollow of an old transport station where the ground dipped into tunnels. Daniel thought they might find safety there, but as they entered, a sharp sound split the air. The click of weapons being loaded. Figures stepped out of the shadows, human deserters, their eyes cold and hungry. One of them grinned, pointing his weapon at her. "The last one," he said. "Do you know what she's worth?" Daniel felt her hand clutch his sleeve, trembling. He raised his rifle, heart pounding, knowing there would be no talking, no mercy. They wanted her alive, but they would kill him without hesitation. The station was a trap, and now they were cornered. In the ruins of a broken world, the human soldier now stood between the last female of her species and a group of deserters who wanted to sell her for fortune. What followed was not only a fight for survival, but the beginning of a bond that would test both their strength and their will to live. The air inside the station was heavy with dust. The ceiling cracked and groaning above. Shadows moved along the walls as the deserters spread out, their weapons trained on Daniel and the fragile figure behind him. He could feel her trembling against his back, her hand clutching his sleeve like a lifeline. His rifle was steady, but he knew the truth. There were too many of them, and his ammunition was low. Still, he could not step aside. The deserter who had spoken earlier, a man with scarred skin and a cruel smile, took a step closer. "Move, soldier," he said. "You know what she is. The last of her kind. She's worth more than your life." Daniel shook his head slowly. His voice was calm, but inside his chest his heart pounded. "She's not yours to take." The man laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Not mine. She doesn't belong to you either. But she will make us rich. Do you even understand what someone would pay to own the last of her species? She's not a survivor. She's a prize." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen too much war, too much death, to let her fall into hands like theirs. He had made a choice back in the bunker, and he would not break it now. Slowly, he edged her behind a broken pillar, keeping his body between her and the circling deserters. Her silver eyes were wide, her lips pressed tight, but in them he saw no surrender. She was scared, yes, but not broken. That gave him strength. The first shot rang out, sharp and loud. Daniel dropped behind cover, dragging her with him. Stones shattered above their heads as bullets tore through the wall. He returned fire, his shots precise, forcing two deserters to dive back behind debris. Smoke and dust filled the air, making every breath sharp in his throat. She clung to him, her body pressed close, her heart racing like a drum. Minutes felt like hours. Each exchange of fire drew them closer, step by step. Daniel moved carefully, guiding her deeper into the tunnels, firing whenever a deserter showed his head. But he was running low on ammunition, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they cornered them again. She seemed to sense his desperation. She touched his shoulder, her voice soft but firm in her broken words. "Together," she whispered. He looked at her, surprised, but then nodded. She was right. He was not fighting alone. In the deeper tunnels, they found old machines left to rust. Daniel used wires and scraps to set quick traps, simple but deadly. When the deserters followed, one fell into a pit of broken metal. Another caught by a snare that crushed his leg. Their screams echoed through the tunnels, but Daniel did not stop. Survival was all that mattered. At one point, the scarred leader caught sight of her through the dust and charged forward, his knife gleaming. Daniel moved fast, blocking the strike with his rifle, the blade slicing across his arm. Pain burned, hot and deep, but he pushed through it. They fought hand to hand, the knife slashing, fists striking, bodies slamming against the stone walls. She watched with terror, but also with fire in her eyes. She picked up a heavy stone and threw it at the man, striking his head just long enough for Daniel to wrestle the knife away. With one final blow, the deserter fell, his cruel smile erased forever. Silence followed, heavy and thick. The surviving deserters fled into the ruins, their courage broken, their prize lost. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his arm bleeding freely. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling but steady as she pressed cloth against the wound. Her touch was gentle, her silver eyes filled with fear for him. "You safe?" Daniel said softly, his voice weak but sure. "That's what matters." She shook her head, her voice breaking as she tried to form words. "No, we safe." The way she said it made his chest tighten. Not just him protecting her, but both of them together surviving against the dark. The following days were hard. Daniel's wound slowed him down. fever creeping into his body. She cared for him as best she could, using herbs and fragments of knowledge from her people. She whispered songs at night, soft sounds that seemed to carry ancient sorrow, but also healing. He did not understand the words, but the sound eased his pain. As he lay weak, she began to tell him more of her people. She spoke of wide rivers that once shone under twin moons, of forests filled with light, of songs sung at gatherings where her sisters danced. Her hands moved as she spoke, drawing pictures in the air. Daniel listened, even through his fever, holding on to her words like a dream he never wanted to end. But she also spoke of the end. The fire that came from the skies, the machines that tore down their homes, the endless chase across worlds until there was no one left but her. Her voice shook, her eyes wet with tears, yet she did not look away. She wanted him to know her truth. And he did. Lying there, Daniel understood something deep. She was not just the last of her kind, she was hope itself. As long as she breathed, her people were not truly gone. And he, a broken soldier with no purpose, had been chosen by fate to carry that hope with her. When his fever finally broke, she smiled at him, tired but relieved. Her hands rested against his, warm and steady. For the first time, he saw in her eyes something more than fear or sorrow. He saw trust, real trust. She believed in him now. She believed he was her protector, her champion, but their struggle was not over. Supplies were running thin, and the ruins grew more dangerous by the day. Patrols searched harder, drones flew lower, deserters lingered in the shadows. Danger was closing in from every side. And then, on one desperate night when Daniel left to search for food, they struck again. The deserters who had fled had not forgotten, and this time they were ready. She tried to fight, her voice crying out, her hands striking, but she was still weak. They overpowered her, dragging her into the darkness. Daniel returned to an empty shelter, the silence louder than any scream. His heart dropped as he saw the signs of struggle, the broken scraps left behind. She was gone. The last female of her species, his fragile hope, his reason to live taken. When the last female of her species was taken by ruthless deserters, the human soldier who had sworn to protect her faced an impossible choice: give up and live or risk everything to save her. His decision would lead to a fight that tested loyalty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of survival. The shelter was empty. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, his rifle heavy in his hands, his chest pounding like a drum. The soft cloth she had used as bedding was torn, her few belongings scattered. Across the floor, marks of struggle scarred the ground, boot prints leading out into the night. She was gone. The silence screamed louder than any battle. For a long moment he could not move. His mind fought against the truth, but the evidence was clear. They had taken her. He dropped to one knee, pressing his hand against the broken earth, where she had last stood. His breath shook, his vision blurred, but slowly his fear turned into fire. He had promised to protect her, and he had failed. Now only one choice remained. He had to find her, no matter the cost, no matter the risk. He rose again, gripping his rifle with both hands. "Hold on," he whispered into the dark. "I'm coming." The tracks were fresh. Daniel followed them through the ruins, every step fast but silent, his eyes sharp even in the faint moonlight. The deserters had numbers, weapons, and cruel hearts, but they did not have his resolve. He was a soldier with nothing left to lose. His wound ached with every movement, blood staining his bandages, but he pushed forward. Pain was nothing. Failure was not an option. Hours passed before he caught sight of them. A small fire burned in the hollow of an old factory, its glow painting the broken walls. Around it sat the deserters, their faces twisted in greed. And there, bound and guarded, was she. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, filled with fear but also defiance. She was bruised, her hands tied, but she was alive. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight. He crouched low, his fingers steady on the trigger. The deserter leader, a tall man with cruel eyes, leaned close to her. "Do you know what you're worth?" he sneered. "You are the last of your kind. With you, we can make entire worlds. Bow, they will pay in blood and treasure to own you." She spat at his feet, her voice low but steady. Words Daniel could not fully understand yet, but the meaning was clear. She would never submit. Daniel's jaw clenched. He moved closer, using the shadows as his cover. His mind worked quickly, planning. He could not fight them all at once. He had to be fast, precise, and willing to risk everything. He circled the camp, setting silent traps from the wires he carried. Every sound of laughter, every cruel word they threw at her only made his hands steadier. He would not let them touch her again. When the moment came, he struck like a storm. His first shot took one deserter down before the man even screamed. The camp erupted in chaos, shouts and gunfire filling the night. Daniel moved through the shadows, every shot purposeful, every strike meant to protect her. She dropped to the ground when a guard was distracted, kicking his legs out from under him, her spirit as fierce as fire. Together, even in chains, she fought beside him. But the deserters were many. They pushed him back, bullets tearing through the walls around him. Daniel's arm burned with pain, blood running down, yet he did not falter. He could see her crawling toward cover, her eyes locked on him, filled with both fear and faith. She believed in him. That gave him strength beyond pain. One by one, his traps snapped into place. A wire tightened around a man's throat, dragging him into the dark. A hidden blade of scrap metal swung down, striking another. The deserters cursed and shouted, but their numbers thinned. Still, the leader remained, his fury burning. He seized her by the arm, dragging her toward the firelight, pressing a knife to her throat. "Drop your weapon." The man roared, his voice sharp as steel. "Or she dies." Daniel froze. His breath caught, his rifle aimed at the man's chest. The blade gleamed against her skin, and her eyes widened with fear. He could kill the man, but a single twitch could end her life. The world narrowed to this moment. He had to choose. Slowly, Daniel lowered his rifle, his hands open. The leader sneered. "Good soldier. You care for her, don't you? That's your weakness, but don't worry. You won't live long enough to regret it." He shoved her to the ground and raised his pistol, aiming at Daniel's chest. Before the shot rang out, she moved. With desperate strength, she kicked the man's leg, knocking him off balance. Daniel seized the chance. He dived forward, grabbing his knife, and the two men crashed to the ground. The struggle was fierce, brutal, filled with rage and desperation. Blows landed, knives slashed, blood spilled. Finally, with one last effort, Daniel drove the blade into the man's chest. The leader gasped, eyes wide with shock before collapsing lifeless to the ground. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Daniel staggered, blood dripping from his wounds, his breath ragged. She crawled to him, her hands shaking, as she untied his jacket and pressed against his bleeding side. Her silver eyes were wet with tears, her voice breaking as she whispered his name. He smiled weakly, reaching to touch her face. "You're safe now," he said softly. But he knew the truth. He was badly hurt. The fight had cost him more than blood. His body was failing, strength leaving him little by little. She saw it too, and her tears fell faster. She shook her head, refusing to accept it, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "No, we safe together." Daniel wanted to believe. Eat. He wanted to stay with her, to see her heal, to see her rebuild. But his vision blurred, his body weak. He pressed the knife into her hands, closing her fingers around it. "Live," he whispered. For your people. For both of us. The sound of more patrols in the distance snapped through the night. They were coming, drawn by the noise of the fight. Daniel pushed her toward the shadows, his own body turning to face the danger. He raised his rifle one last time, planting himself like a wall between her and the world. She tried to pull him back, her voice breaking, but he shook his head with a faint smile. I'll hold them, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Run. Survive. Tears blurred her silver eyes. As she clutched the knife, her body trembling, torn between running and staying. But when the first lights of the patrol pierced the dark, Daniel stepped forward, firing with all his strength. His roar filled the ruins, a soldier's final stand. She turned and fled into the night, her heart shattering. But her spirit burning with his sacrifice, the human soldier had made his final stand to protect the last female of her species, giving her the chance to escape. Alone in the ruins of a dying world, she now carried both her people's future and his sacrifice in her heart. What happened next would decide if hope could survive even when everything else had been destroyed. The night swallowed her as she ran through the ruins, her breath sharp in her chest, her legs weak but unyielding. Behind her, the sound of gunfire echoed like thunder, each shot a piece of him fighting to protect her. She wanted to turn back, to stand with him, but his words burned in her mind. Live, survive, for your people. For both of us. The ruins stretched endlessly, broken towers like black teeth against the sky. She stumbled but did not stop, clutching the knife he had given her, its weight heavy with his strength. Her tears blurred her vision, but her will drove her forward. She was not just running for herself. She was running for every sister, every family, every voice that had been silenced. And she was running for him, the human who had given her more than protection. He had given her hope. At last the gunfire faded into silence. The world seemed too quiet, too still, and her chest tightened with dread. She stopped, trembling, staring back into the darkness. There was no sound of footsteps following, no sign of him. She fell to her knees, clutching the knife to her chest, her silver eyes spilling tears. She whispered his name, her voice breaking. He was gone. For a long time she sat there, the silence heavy around her. The weight of loss pressed down until she could hardly breathe. Yet as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she felt something stir inside her. His sacrifice could not be for nothing. If she gave up now, his fight, his wounds, his final stand, all of it would be wasted. She rose slowly, wiping her tears, her face set with quiet strength. She would live. Not just for herself, but for him. Days turned into weeks as she moved through the ruins, hiding from patrols, scavenging what little food remained. She grew stronger, her wounds healing, her steps more steady. She remembered the lessons he had taught her: how to move silently, how to use shadows, how to turn scraps into tools. Every time she lit a small fire or set a trap, she felt him beside her. In her dreams, she heard his voice, steady and strong, reminding her to never give in. One evening she found herself at the edge of a wide valley where the ruins thinned, and beyond lay open ground covered in wild growth. For the first time in months she saw green pushing through the blackened soil. New life. She knelt in the grass, her fingers brushing the leaves, and for the first time she allowed herself to smile. The world was scarred, but it was not dead. Just as she was not dead. Yet she was still alone, the last of her people. The thought ached deep inside her, but then she remembered his words. She was not just one. She carried the memory of all who had been lost. She carried the strength of her sisters, the songs of her mothers, the dreams of her people. And she carried the courage of one human soldier who had chosen to stand by her side. Together, their story could not die. She found an abandoned outpost on the far side of the valley, hidden beneath broken stone. Inside were old machines, silent but not destroyed. She studied them carefully, remembering fragments of her people's knowledge. With time, she learned to repair them, to use their light, to send signals. Each night, she sent a pulse into the sky, a call for help, a beacon carrying both her name and his. She did not know if anyone would hear, but she kept trying. Weeks later, one night as the stars burned bright, she saw movement in the sky. A ship, battered but real, descending slowly. Her heart raced. She rushed outside, waving, her silver eyes shining in the starlight. The ship landed, its doors opening to reveal human survivors, weary but alive. They looked at her with awe and caution, but she stood tall, her voice strong. "I am the last of my kind," she said, "and I live because of one of yours." The survivors listened as she told them her story, as simple as she could, her words broken but full of truth. They heard of Daniel, the soldier who had fought against all odds to protect her. They saw the knife he had given her, the weapon she carried like a sacred treasure. And in their eyes she saw respect, sorrow, and something else, hope. They promised to help her, to carry her story, to make sure his sacrifice was never forgotten. Together, they left the ruins, climbing aboard the ship, the ground falling away beneath them. She pressed her hand to the window, watching the wasteland grow smaller, the ashes of war left behind. Her heart ached for him, but she knew he was with her still. His spirit lived in her strength, in her survival, in the story she now carried. To the stars. Years later, her story spread across human colonies and beyond. She became a symbol of survival, of hope rising from ashes. Children learned of the human soldier who gave his life for the last of another race, and they called him the champion of the last. His name was remembered not as a soldier of war, but as a protector, a hero who stood when no one else would. She rebuilt her life among humans, always carrying her people's memory. In time, with help, she began to work toward something more, a chance to restore her kind, to rebuild what had been lost. She knew it would take years, maybe lifetimes, but she was not afraid. She had survived the end of her world. She had seen a human give his life so that her flame would not go out. That flame still burned, brighter than ever. On quiet nights she sat beneath the stars, whispering his name, her silver eyes soft with memory. "I live," she would say. "I live because of you." And in those moments, she felt him near, not gone, but part of her forever. The end.